Hello, AP Literature and Honors English 4 students. Welcome back to online English class. Today, we are going to be preparing for your Unit 5 test. And the first thing I want to do is just go over the information in the email that I sent to you today, which has the attachment of the test, which you should open only whenever you are ready to begin the test. Okay, so if you want to continue studying, you absolutely can. But once you open the document, that's whenever you have to begin the test. Okay, so you only have access to the text of the poems. Both AP students are going to need the poems that we've studied in class, along with Honors English 4 students. Okay, but you cannot have access to your notes. And you cannot have access to the prose sections of the textbook to help you define a poetic term that you don't remember, okay? So when you're ready to start working on the test, I need you to open the attachment that is labeled AP Unit 5 test or the Honors English 4 Unit 5 test. Don't open the wrong document. Don't work on the wrong test, please. All right, then you need to open a Word document of your own. Label and format your document clearly. If your document's poorly formatted, you're going to be penalized. You need one section for your short responses and one section for your essay, okay? Be logical and number things clearly. And finally, I need you to submit the test before you go to bed on Thursday. Go to bed at a decent hour. Include your name and class in the subject line of your email. For example, Lila the Beast Stewart, Unit 5 test. For AP English Literature class. Don't get fancy with the bolded portion of this subject line. That's how I'm going to filter my inbox, so it needs to be exactly as it is printed. Okay, so simple instructions there. Just make sure that you are beginning your test once you've opened the document. All right, you can wait and open that document on Thursday morning and then turn it in before you go to bed on Thursday night. Or you can go ahead and start working on it on Wednesday evening. I don't really care how you go at it, but you just need to make sure that once you've opened the document, you're beginning the test. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at your review guide in pursuit of preparing for this test effectively. Okay, so as I already explained on Monday, the test is going to evaluate your understanding of two things, okay? One, short answer responses that are going to just basically evaluate your broad understanding of these poetic concepts, all right? So you need to be able to be ready to describe various kinds of figurative language. You need to know what a voice is. You need to be able to read tone and describe tone. If there's a persona narrator, at work in the text, you need to be able to identify that. You need to be able to describe sonic structure, including alliteration, assonance, cacophony, euphony, rhymes and rhyme schemes, rhythms, whether it be iambic or trochaic, or I'm not going to ask you anything probably about an anapestic or dactylic meter because they're so infrequent, but you just need to be ready to describe any of this information that I would ask you to describe, okay? The second thing that you're going to need to do is write a close analysis essay, all right? So if you're in the AP class, you're going to write an essay about a piece of poetry that perhaps you haven't studied before and that I'm not alerting to you to the existence of, all right? So if you're in the Honors English 4 course, okay, you've got it a little bit easier, although still pretty challenging here overall as we approach the end of your English education here at Redeemer. You need to be ready to write an independent analysis about a prompt that I have not given you yet, okay, about one of these poems, okay? So make sure that you're paying close attention to the language of the prompt and answering what the task that the prompt has given you, because it might not just say, right, tell me what this poem means, right? It might be more specific than that. It might ask you to analyze a specific symbol in the poem and the construction of that symbol's meaning. So you would need to therefore orient your entire essay around unpacking the symbolic significance of that central symbol, or perhaps to analyze the perspective or attitude of the narrator, or analyze the characterization or the development of an individual in the poem. Okay, so it just depends on what the prompt is. That's how we're going to define what your task is, okay? But regardless of whether or not you're in the honors class or the AP class, I'm going to be using a similar rubric to evaluate your work, okay? And that rubric comes from the College Board, okay? So I want to look quickly at the rubric, the way that I'm going to score your essay, okay? So for the poetic analysis prompt, which by the way is for you AP Lit students who are going to be writing the prose analysis prompt on your coming exam, it's very similar, almost actually exactly the same, all right? And so the first point is scored out of 6, and the first point comes from thesis, okay? So your essay needs to have a thesis that responds to the prompt with a thesis statement that presents a defensible interpretation of the poem, okay? So 2 things there. It needs to be defensible and interpretive. And number 2, it needs to be in response to what the prompt is telling you to interpret, okay? So if you simply restate the prompt, you don't get the point. If you make a general comment about the poem but not an interpretive, precise comment, you don't get the point. If you just describe the poem's feature, right? Like the poem has figurative language in it, or the poem has a speaker, or the poem uses metonymy, or just whatever, right? Instead of using those features of the poem in order to interpret its meaning, then you don't get the point, all right? You do get the point if you develop a defensible interpretation of the speaker's of some element of the poem. For this particular question that we're going to look at in just a second, the prompt requires the students to analyze the speaker's complex portrayal of the landlady, okay? So this is actually from last year's exam. Okay, the second major section of the scoring criteria is scored from 0 to 4. All right, and this is all about your line of reasoning, which is going to organize evidence and comment on that evidence in order to support your interpretive thesis statement. Okay, so obviously, if starting at 4, if you provide evidence, okay, that supports all of your claims. Okay, so in other words, the poem means this, and it means this because of this particular element. That's a subclaim. Okay, so the poem means this. That's your central claim, and because or as can be seen in this section of the poem, or this area of the poem, or this word choice, or this sentence, or this line, or this stanza. That's a subclaim, right? Then you would need to evidence that by engaging with the language of the text, and describing that language sophisticatedly is something that's going to obviously improve the quality of your evidence. Then you need to comment on that, right? Explain how this piece of evidence, that piece of text, relates to your interpretive assertion. Okay, very simple. And obviously, if you're going to get 4 out of 4, you need to make sure that you are talking about literary techniques or poetic techniques at work. Okay, working backwards, all right, for 3, it's just weaker commentary. So you still have textual evidence and you're still talking about some literary elements, but it's weaker commentary. Okay, for 2, you have some evidence and you have some commentary, but it's not connected to a sophisticated analysis of the poem's literary elements. All right, so notice this is lacking for in section 2, and also it's just underdeveloped evidence and underdeveloped commentary. All right, 1 point you get if your evidence is general and your commentary just kind of summarizes or restates the evidence, but it doesn't explain how that evidence relates to your interpretive assertion. 0 points comes if you just repeat your thesis over and over again, or you just don't offer any evidence or commentary. Okay, there's more information about the decision rules and scoring notes. If you want to pause it and read these line by line, I'd highly recommend it to you. You can also get a hold of this simply by just Googling the information that's in the address bar here, AP English Language and Composition 2020 Free Response Scoring Guidelines, okay, from the 2019 exam questions. Google that, you'll find this page. And the final criteria, okay, the 6th point comes from sophistication of thought, all right, and the development of a complex literary argument, all right. So what that would look like is identifying and exploring complexities or tensions within the poem, all right, which might perhaps signal the fact that you understand that this poem can be read on multiple levels, or it can be read with multiple meanings. Again, you don't want to deviate from your thesis statement, but you just would want to explore what you would call nuance. All right, you would want to perhaps situate the students' interpretations in a broader context. A broader ideological context would be show your sophistication, show your mastery of the content, and then obviously alternative interpretations. That's kind of like in number one, and then finally employing a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive. Okay, so that's just style of your writing. Okay, making sure that you're integrating quotes well, making sure that your composition skills are on par with college level assignments. Okay, so there's some examples, all right, of how to not get this point here. If you want to explore those, you can pause the video and read them word for word, or once again go to the free response scoring guidelines. Okay, so let's take a quick look. We're not going to dwell on this too long, and you can explore this on your own time if you want to. But I just want to take a quick look at the prompt that this rubric is about. Okay, so carefully read PK Page's 1943 poem, The Landlady. Then, in a well organized essay, analyze the speaker's complex portrayal of the landlady. Okay, so interestingly, here, right, the prompt is basically asking you to do a character analysis of the landlady, who the prompt implies is complex, has kind of a nuanced perspective, and the speaker has a kind of nuanced attitude or tone towards this individual. Okay, then they say you might want to consider elements like imagery, selection of detail, and the tone or the attitude of the speaker. Obviously, makes a lot of sense. Okay, the poem is heavily reliant on imagery and obviously details, and the speaker's tone is obviously going to be central device that Page communicates the complexity of the landlady, even as the landlady evokes a complex response from the speaker. Okay, so instead of reading all of the poem, all right, I just kind of, you can pause it and read it right now if you want to. I don't want to take up too much time because this is your study time and I don't want to ramble on and on. But I would like to look at a sample student response, okay, and just basically unpack the way that they've structured their response, okay? So we start with this kind of introduction here that the College Board liked. In every person's life, there consists a rarely thought of group of acquaintances who, despite interacting little in person with an individual, know intimate details of their life. The garbage man, the postal service worker, the landlady. These people enjoy a unique perspective of the populations they serve. They process the things we deem useless and discard, handle the personal messages and financial information we send and receive. They own the homes we foolishly call our own. Okay, all right, a little melodrama there. Let's get to the thesis. In Page's 1943 poem, The Landlady, he portrays one such woman with intimate knowledge of the lives of others, despite her boarders, in other words, the people who live on the properties that she owns, attempts to maintain their privacy. Page portrays the landlady. Here we go, right? How does Page portray the landlady? Here we go. Page portrays the landlady as a curious and inquisitive presence, all right, who may just have dark motives, okay, using the elements of imagery and tone to convey her complexity. Now, is that a particularly moving thesis statement to me? No, not really. It doesn't connect to any larger ideas that are explored in the poem, like loneliness and the vindictiveness that can come upon an individual who is in close proximity with other people, but not an intimate relationship with them, which is really kind of what the poem conveys. But it does offer an interpretive assertion about how the landlady is characterized, okay? And so therefore, it receives the thesis point, okay? So not rocket science, not too difficult there. But the College Board also likes this sort of connection to the broader context of people who have knowledge of the details of our lives, but that we don't really know personally. Okay. So the body paragraphs then get into offering evidence and commentary that develops that assertion, okay? Characterizing the landlady as both curious and inquisitive, but also perhaps dark in her motives as well. Well, the essay explores some of those dark motives and unpacks some of those dark motives using the text of the poem, which again strengthens the thesis and makes the essay better. Okay, so if you want to read through all these body paragraphs, you absolutely can. But basically, right, the student starts by analyzing Page's use of imagery, which highlights certain specific body parts with which the landlady conducts her observations, all right, giving her a nearly unhuman or inhuman presence by isolating each act of invasion. Okay, so she's sort of the impression here that Page gives is that she's this sort of mechanical woman who is mechanically seeking for relationship. All right, it's hardwired into her nature, and she attempts to fulfill those needs. No matter what the cost, no matter the extent to which she invades the privacy of those around her. Then the student talks about the ominous tone, the very ominous tone. Okay, so I hate that word. Please don't use that kind of language. The very ominous tone. It's just ominous. Okay, to emphasize the potential dangerousness of the woman. Okay, so inquisitive, mechanistically desiring of intimate knowledge. And also perhaps these dark motives, right, that is conveyed through the ominous tone of the speaker. Okay, then supporting that interpretive assertion with actual textual evidence, and also explaining the significance of that textual evidence, right? Speaking about malicious connotation, portraying the landlady as perhaps a predator, and pursuing the dark secrets of her boarders as her prey. Okay, so this essay, does it knock my socks off? No. What would I give it? According to the rubric, I would probably give it a 5 out of 6. Probably wouldn't give it the sophistication point because it's not connecting to some of the central ideas explored in the poem, like loneliness and like the deep desire for intimacy that is hardwired into human individuals. But does it develop an interpretive assertion? Does it offer evidence and commentary? Yeah. Okay, so it got a fine grade from the graders on the 2019 exam. All right, so much in the same way, all right, I just want to call your attention back to something. You need to make sure that your essay is focalizing its attention on what interpretive task the prompt is asking you to undertake. Okay, if you do something different, then then your essay falls apart because your thesis is not responding to the prompt. Okay, so make sure you make an interpretive assertion. Okay, and make sure that that interpretive assertion is in direct response to the prompt. Okay, that's huge, both for honors and regular students. Obviously, you honor students are going to be writing about an essay that you've read and studied, so you've got a lot more context, a lot more opportunity to develop a sophisticated analysis. If you're in the AP class, right, it's all going to have to be independently constructed, right, which is a lot more difficult, but also a lot more representative of your ability to construct meaningful readings of complex text independently, okay, which is a great critical thinking skill. Right, so if you want some more examples of these kinds of things, then you can go to the AP College Board's website, go to the exam page, and you can explore past questions right here, right? And if you just go to the free response questions for all of these years, you can see the poems, the kinds of poems that are offered there. And most likely, as usually, what do I do for the Unit 5 test? I just select a poem that I deem particularly thought-provoking and perhaps even challenging, and I just offer that poem to you in order for you to analyze. Okay? So that's what's coming in terms of the essay, right? In terms of the short response questions, they're pretty self-explanatory, right? I'm just going to call your attention to specific uses of literary elements in the poems that we've studied, and you are going to have to explain and identify various elements at work in various poems and to varying degrees of specificity. I might ask you to describe the form of God's grandeur, or to identify a kind of figurative language at work in a specific line. Okay, you might the correct answer might be something like an extended metaphor is introduced in this line, which is a version of figure of speech, or euphonic sound devices are relied on before the volta and love calls us to the things of the world. And I might have you quote a textual example of that. All right. So basically, all of these composition skills are going to be at work in your essay. Your ability to develop paragraphs that include claims and evidence. All right. So go over these concepts. Make sure that you understand how what each element of these things means. At this point in your education, they should probably be pretty self-evident to you. What it means to develop commentary, what it means to construct a thesis statement, all right, and how to select relevant and sufficient evidence to support your line of reasoning in your essay. Okay, so it's an exercise in logic. Okay, these pieces of analytical writing. It's an exercise in your ability to assert something, right, an interpretive assertion, and then support that assertion with relevant, accurate forms of evidence that are explained in your commentary. Okay, so what I would invite you to do at this point is, if you're in the honors class, make sure that you're revisiting these poems and make sure you know them inside and out. If you're in the AP class, I'd recommend looking at some of the past AP prompts. Okay, just familiarizing yourself with the language. Make sure that you understand what's being asked of the student in each one of those kinds of prompts. Make sure that you've mastered all of this information, and also make sure that you're familiar with the poems that we've studied throughout the course of the unit, so that when called upon to identify some poetic devices at work in them, you'll already have a deep knowledge of that poem, so that you'll have some context to go off. Okay, so it's a challenging test. This is not an easy test. All right, in fact, it's one that typically students don't do as well on. All right, so and it's largely because they just don't know this. They don't really know this stuff. Like, they don't really know it inside and out. And so when I ask them to deploy their knowledge of these things, it's kind of a lot of hemming and hawing and umming and guessing. Okay, so make sure you know the stuff inside and out. Make sure you construct a reasonable essay, and make sure you know how to develop an interpretive assertion in response to a specific prompt. That's all that I have for you today. I hope you have an excellent day, and make sure that you are getting me that test before you go to bed on Thursday night. Have an awesome day.